the final two factors that we have that we're going to touch on, and as I do this, I'm going to ask this panelist to please come up to the stage. Technology and workforce are our final two factors, and I just want to give you a taste of those. If I can get you slides to go forward to factor 4. Can you put it on factor 4, please? He does it better than I do. Maybe. Obviously, technology and workforce are very closely linked. We need technology to help us move, track, and secure and manage the movement of freight. This needs to be done reliably, efficiently, cost-effectively. We've heard those things throughout today. I've tried to boil down, and actually the governor used this phrase as well, which is exciting to hear, boil down this technology application into 3 areas, the 3 V's of logistics, as I've talked about if you've heard me speak before: volume, velocity, and visibility. Sounds a lot better coming from the governor. These solutions come from innovative companies all over the state of Georgia, from large companies down to our small entrepreneurs that are all over Georgia, a lot of them here in Atlanta, but all over the state. And from our academic researchers that we have located, again, throughout our state, over 100 different programs offering logistics training and education opportunities focused on logistics and supply chain, from Georgia Southern with the new PhD program and on. If you just go to I can go to the next slide. But without the workforce and the people trained to use these technologies, fix these technologies, improve upon these technologies, it doesn't really matter. It's kind of a useless effort to have technology that you don't have people that can operate and use. Georgia, again, mentioned, that has over 100 different programs. The state's also home to the nation's #1 workforce training program in Quick Start, and also the Georgia Work Ready program, helping develop that next wave and retrain some of the workers that you have in your businesses, both of which have an active focus in logistics. We're going to transition to our Q&A part of the program. We've got a good group of panelists for you. As I mentioned before, we've trying to curtail questions, and I am amazed that we are exactly on schedule, which is a phenomenal thing. We've got all the different presentations we had to do today. So as they're coming up, you can read about them in your program. Their bios are located in the back of the program. There's going to be 4 or 5 mic runners. I can't see from the lights, but there's going to be people in the audience with mobile mics. So if you raise your hand, there's one back here, and there's a couple over on the other side. So if you have a question, please just raise your hand, and they'll bring a microphone to you. Just tell us your name, who you're with, and give us your question. If the panelists could please come to the stage, and we'll get started in just a minute. So as we're having a seat, if there's anybody want to start off, I know we've got a couple folks that had a couple questions. Craig, in the back, as we're getting settled.
I always like being at the end. Feels like a presidential debate.
Yes, sir.
Chris Pettis. We've got a contingency here from Thomaston, Upson County, in the center of the state. Paige was gracious enough to come to our community and give a presentation like this just a few weeks ago. He spoke a lot about fueling competitiveness, and I wonder if there are some lessons learned that we can do better to fuel competitiveness in logistics in Georgia.
Anyone? Carl?
Well, I'll take the first stab at it. And it's always dangerous when an academic starts because you never know when they'll end.
My mic is louder.
But I will keep this short, I promise. I think probably when it comes to Georgia, I don't think we really have a problem with competitiveness. I think we're all fairly competitive in our industries. One area, though, I think we could do a little bit better on is learning how to collaborate. And specifically when we start thinking about our transportation providers, our 3PLs, our lead logistics providers we talked about, we really need them to be on our team and not necessarily against our team. Let me give you a really good example of that. I was at another conference for the Food Shippers of America, moderating a session of panelists, and we're talking about their long-term contracts that they had with their carriers. They're strategic partners, and the longest contract was 1 year. Now, I've been married for 28 years. If I went to my wife when I proposed and said, hey, I want to do this 1 year renewable, it wouldn't even lasted 1 year. So I think probably the biggest thing we need to do is learn how to collaborate better with those providers.
Good comment. Any other thoughts on competitiveness? Anyone else?
Over here?
Can't see in the back. Yeah, Mike?
Is this on? Okay. Yeah, hi, Mike Klein with the Georgia Public Policy Foundation. And this question is for Todd Long. I'd like to follow Todd in the transportation bill. You've talked about the November 2012 voting on that. Of course, that's about 2.5 years away. How are you going to bridge the gap between now and then? And of course, the big elephant in the room is what happens if the voters vote no?
Yeah, that's a great question. Certainly, we have a regular federal aid program, and we're going to continue down that path. As you know, they're up for debate today. The last day of the session is a $200 million or $300 million bond program to do freight-type projects. I didn't mention that in my speech earlier because at the time I was giving my speech, I didn't know if it was $200 or $300 million. It looks like it's going to be about $200 million. So and that will be fiscal 11 bond sales. So it would be a little bit of influx of cash to freight-type projects around the state. Now, that's not enough to really bridge the gap on what your needs are. So we'll just have to make do, and we'll have to live with what we have, just like every agency and every company is having to do. Now, what if the voters don't pass it? Absolutely, that may happen. We know that. There are provisions in the bill that you can put it back to vote within a certain amount of months. I think it's a couple of years. So if it passes in one region, it's going great. In other regions that are seeing that, man, we're missing out, then they have the opportunity to go right back out to the voters within the 2-year period. It is no different than any sales tax with any county. You know, every county is fearful every year. What happens if our sales tax does not pass? How are we going to build jails? How are we going to build parks? So it's the same dilemma, but it gives the people in this room, the citizens, an opportunity to make that decision.
Questions? Craig? It's kind of hard to see you. The mic runners, you can just wave a little bit so I can, because I get these glaring lights.
This question is really for Ralph. My name is Diane Gray with N8 Energy. We hear a lot about livability and sustainability and environmental issues. Where is the FHA on that?
The Federal Highway Administration is, it's a good question, and thanks for asking that. Right now, the new administration has been looking a lot more into, you're hearing a lot of the buzzwords, livability and sustainability. We've been implementing that through our transportation system. Some of these techniques have been ongoing for a number of years now. Especially you hear about ITS, Intelligent Transportation Systems. You may not see it around you, but it's out there right now. And the Atlanta network, transportation network, through the cooperation of the Georgia Department of Transportation and some of the other local agencies, have been at the forefront of such. Information a lot of you may see on your cell phones now. You get information about where green, yellow, and red. That information is coming through the Navigator system that's being directly forced through. We're seeing other areas of livability in land use. We want to understand a little bit more. The Federal Highway Administration has been leading efforts and working closely with our MPOs, such as the Atlanta Regional Commission, to kind of look at land use activities. The Atlanta region alone ranks about third with the amount of distribution warehouse space in the entire country, behind Chicago and Dallas. So that's very important in this particular area as well. But there's efforts. We have funding that's been allocated. I believe CSX has a locomotive that they call a GenSet locomotive that's quieter, it's clean running, it makes a good neighborhood partner, and you're starting to see infrastructure like this that federal highway monies are being involved for such.
I'll follow up on that. We've actually got a significant amount of money in our federal aid program now. Like you said, it goes toward those types of initiatives. We have a transportation enhancement program that we're actually forced to use 10% of a certain category of funds for bike trails, renovations in downtown areas, paving projects in downtown streetscapes, those kind of projects. And we've done a lot in that area. Obviously, the new administration, particularly Secretary LaHood, is very adamant about doing a lot more livability projects. One thing we've probably not tackled as well from a state perspective is land use. A lot of publications will tell you that proper land use probably can make your system 50% more efficient. The state of Georgia, though, is not going to get in the business of dictating land use to local governments. This is a home rule state, which basically means we leave land use decisions, zoning decisions up to city councils and county commissions, and the state's not going to dictate that. But we can encourage it, and a big part of our statewide plan is to try to encourage the proper land use to make our system more efficient.
In the back, Emily?
Yes, Bobby Miller from Ortec, and this is sort of piggybacking on Carl's comment. Do you foresee actually more warehouse and transportation collaboration when in fact we know there's not really a competitive advantage of putting two different manufacturers' product on one truck? Do you foresee reducing CO2 by having more collaboration from that standpoint?
Please, Carl.
Well, when I refer to collaboration on that side, Bobby, I think probably the biggest thing is on the relationships that we have in place right now. And I'm not going to name names on this, but to avoid the guilty, and there's a lot of guilty people in this room. I'm one of them too. But, you know, if you walk through a warehouse, you see a lot of really stupid things. Anybody in that situation? Or you look at their transportation runs, and you just go, why are they doing this, right? But for that provider to come and say, well, let me show you how to save money, it is actually going to take out money out of my pocket. There's no incentive or motivation for me to go ahead and help you to do that. That's what I talk about these relationships. We really need to go and think about how are we vested in the success of each other. What can I do to make you more successful? And by doing that, I ought to also share part of that reward. I'm not talking about gain sharing. It's a long-term commitment. And what you're starting to see, and not just, unfortunately, you're not seeing it in transportation yet. You're seeing it in facilities management. You're seeing it in high tech. What you're seeing are companies committed to each other for long periods of time. What about a 10-year renewable contract? How about a 10-year contract that gets renewed or gets a 5-year add-on within 18 months? How about a contract that rewards you for transforming the business, and by doing so, you actually keep and retain your profit margin that you would have lost? Those are the types of collaborations and vested relationships that we're trying to talk about. And it isn't necessarily competing with each other. It is almost like a marriage by being more synergistic and providing value for each other. And by doing that, now we lower the cost of business for everybody. We're getting to be more competitive. We have a lot of great 3PLs, a lot of great transportation providers in the Georgia and the region. If we did that as a group and started thinking of ways about how we can be more collaborative with each other, I think we'd even get a bigger boom. We've got the infrastructure. We need the relationships to help that.
Here's a question.
Please, Jamie.
Are you talking about, which line are you talking about? Are you talking about Eric, why don't you do Hardy Georgia?
Yeah. Can anybody hear his question, first of all? His microphone's not on, Sandy.
Repeat his question.
He asked about the east-west rail, the proposed east-west rail corridor. What's the proposed completion date or activities with that?
I think what we understand is it's going to be a phased project in the sense of they're initially setting up the facility now and looking towards some improvements on the line. You have two rail lines that really make up a part of that before you get the last mile in to the port. You have the Heart of Georgia Railroad, as well as the Genesee and Wyoming owns another piece of it. They're in the process, as was mentioned, assembling the parcels and getting the initial facility imprint put in place. But I think one of the things that's going to be ultimate to the success of that project is getting some investment in the Heart of Georgia so that it can sustain the weights that are required to make those movements. Some of that issue will be related to, and I think Todd referred to it, is some of the bond monies that are available for freight. Those are the types of projects that are what we'll be needing to do to be able to complete that, find the financing to be able to fix a couple of bridges, fix some infrastructure that has not been rated for the types of weights and product loads that are happening. So that'll probably be the limiting factor on that East-West Railroad is how soon we can update and upgrade the rail line that connects those two areas.
Ken, I had a quick, we talked about just collaboration. I don't mean to steal the microphone, but mine's louder. So, Ken, there was some interesting collaboration we talked about with Volvo. And if you can or could just mention a little bit about what you're doing. I think it's an interesting collaborative relationship between two very large, successful companies that you might just find.
Right. I mean, it is effectively a strategic supply agreement. So it's not a joint venture. What we're doing is we've entered into a manufacturing agreement to actually manufacture skid steer loaders, our design, that will be branded and differentiated slightly for Volvo. And for JCB, and I think for Georgia, it's a significant achievement because it really is a vote of confidence in what is a very unique single-arm design versus what many of you know to be a twin-arm Bobcat type design. Mm-hmm. So it is a big first for our company.
I think with what you mentioned before with Volvo going into that relationship and the reputation that Volvo has for quality and standard and others.
Absolutely. It's a huge validation of the safety and the eco-friendliness and the validity of the design.
Yeah, we'll see more of that kind of stuff. Yes, ma'am.
Chuck Eddy from Hartsfield Warehouse. Paul, you spoke a little bit about the increase in exports, and could you break that down a little bit by goods, a little discussion around that? What kind of goods do you expect kind of growth in?
The U.S. is actually a tremendously successful exporting country in terms of manufacturing, and sometimes that gets a little short shrift when we talk about how big of an import deficit we've had. The power of the United States competitively around the world is not just because we're going to depend on a dollar that declines. It's actually because of the very high technology and the very productive workforce we have, and that's really where the competitiveness comes in and why you've seen investment in an incredibly advanced developed economy with relatively high wage rates. It's because that high wage labor is incredibly productive. And we've achieved productivity gains in the U.S. and across a whole number of sectors that have enabled the U.S. manufacturers to stay competitive. And that's likely to continue even more so in the future. So it's high value added, very, very sophisticated and advanced design equipment of all kinds. It ranges from construction equipment to medical and consumer products, business equipment and high tech, of course. What it doesn't tend to be is anything that is a commodity which doesn't offer itself up to substantial additional manufacturing efficiencies such that you can reduce further, say, a high labor content. So we've seen that in some areas like textiles or footwear, where the U.S. really isn't going to be a competitive manufacturer unless there's a particular market aspect like specialization or customization, where perhaps that gives an advantage to a manufacturer in the U.S. But as we go forward, it's still likely that as the economy continues to grow, that manufacturing is actually going to have a smaller role in the total country's exports, and that services exports are going to continue to grow as a share of the total export earnings in the economy. But having said that, our forecasts are still that the value of exports continues to increase. And a lot of times we hear discussions about the decline in exports. The decline is in the number of workers it takes to manufacture those products, not the value of the products or the number of themselves. So that's probably the best perspective to have on it, is because we have an incredibly productive workforce with very high capital investment in that manufacturing capacity that drives exports.
Thank you. In the back, Craig.
Hello. My name is Alvaro Castillo, and I had a question about grants. Particularly federal and state grants. Recently, we saw the Department of Transportation issue an award of about 51 projects for programs under the Tiger federal funding. Are there any other such opportunities or programs in place that might be coming up in the future?
I can answer that. Yeah, there was a Tiger grant application process back last fall. Georgia put in 32 applications to consider all the different communities around the state. We put in from the Georgia DOT 4 applications, and they were mostly freight-oriented projects. We put in a project down in Savannah, Jimmy DeLoach, and we put in a project on 75 south of Atlanta. We put in some, freight line upgrades between Atlanta and Macon. But unfortunately, Georgia did not get any of those grants in that first round. There is round 2 of Tiger has been posted on the web. They're accepting comments on the application process through May 7th. This time it's about $600 million nationwide, where before it was $1.5 billion nationwide. So We're going to be submitting projects for that over the next, I guess, few months, and hopefully we'll get something out of that.
Let me just add that the original Tiger grants that was mentioned, we had from federal, through the USDOT, approximately 1,400 applicants for about $60 billion worth of needed projects. So think about it, and out of the total amount in the entire, that was available was $1.5 billion. So 60 billion versus 1.5. And like what was mentioned, only 51 projects were selected. So it's very competitive. And this next round will be even more competitive too, because there's extra elements being added in. It's not part of the original stimulus bill. This is part of a fiscal year 10 appropriations bill, and we're also including arrangements with HUD involved in this as well. So you'll be seeing a variety of different components, but it still has the intent for some port activity, transit, a lot of infrastructure that you would that's kind of devoted for the same intent that the original Tiger grants had.
Right. Question? Yeah. Derek King with Manpower Staffing. I have a two-part question. The workforce is continually changing. What do you see in this area? And the second part is, although we at Manpower have our perspective, what is the panel's perspective on how to better prepare workers for the changes in the economy?
And we talked about technology and workers, how they connect together. Any comments on education maybe and how you're preparing the workforce of the future there, Carl?
Well, don't lay that at my doorstep.
We could be here a while, guys.
I will try to do my best on that side, but I'm one person. I think there's a couple things, and Paige, one of the things that came up earlier is that you talk about the number of programs within the state, 110. That's a lot.
Yeah.
So we ought to be very, very proud of that. Two, there's a lot of things I think we can do that you probably aren't as aware of that you can do. One is just be visible, get involved. Go down to the community colleges, or go down to Georgia Southern, Clayton State, things like that. Ask the faculty what you can do to be involved in their programs and sharing. We have some great relationships already at Southern, and that really helps out a lot. So I think spreading that wealth around is really good and supporting those programs. Probably the most important thing that you can do is sharing your experience. And what I mean by that is bringing somebody in to work a summer, to work for 6 months within your organization. If you want somebody to grow up fast, if you want somebody to really understand business, they need to walk in your shoes. They need to walk and see what you do. And those experiences are really critical. I find it really interesting. I have a lot of companies that come to recruit, and they say, I ask them what they're looking for in a student, and they say, well, we want somebody who's interned. We want somebody who's got experience. And my next question is always, well, tell me about your internship program. And about 80% of the time, they don't have one. And I have to now edit myself from what I'd really like to say to them, because I don't say that. But I really want to say is then, why are you being so hypocritical? If you're going to do it, if you want it, go ahead and share back into those organizations, share back into those lives. And I think you will get a better workforce from those experiences.
And that goes true for, I know the technical colleges, we have a lot of convocations, having industry involvement, just like with the Department of Transportation, that industry involvement in the planning process is just as critical from the technical college all the way up through the higher education departments. Nancy, did you have a question? Please.
Nancy Cobb, One Georgia Authority. This is a two-part question as well. The first is, we all recognize the tremendous value of the port in Savannah and the economic impact that it ripples all across the state. Looking out 15, 20 years, where do we see the port in Savannah in terms of ability to manage that growth so that the rest of the state can receive the benefits of that, of what's the traffic coming into the port of Savannah? Second part is, Paul, you had a slide up that talked about modes of transportation, truck, sea, and air, I believe. From 2005 to 2015, sea, I think, doubled from 2005 to 2015, whereas the truck and the air, pretty flat, as I recall. I'd be interested in your comments on what's driving just the increased global traffic, emerging markets, et cetera, and what factors figured into your equation.
That's two questions. I don't know, maybe I'll
Go ahead and take the second part. I'll do the
I'll
first
start
part.
with the second question. That growth in sea freight the reason for that is twofold. One of which is much faster growth in trade between continents. So I talked about Asian trade. That occurs over the ocean or in the air. And what we've seen, actually even before the recession, is being on the part of shippers and at the result of advice from logistics experts is that air cargo is the most expensive, least environmentally friendly, and sometimes actually not that convenient in terms of arranging the land transport to connect to it, such that substituting ocean freight is preferable if you have to work across borders. And in terms of the total value of goods, we've seen increased container services as containerization has penetrated the rest of the world, which obviously has benefited the Port of Savannah in Georgia, being a leading container port on the coast for that. We see that actually continuing, and that there will be additional capacity for new container services. The vessels have the capacity to actually sail faster. They're not doing that right now. They're slow steaming to save money on the energy consumption. But the potential is there for even greater share on the ocean side in terms of total international trade. And that slide represented trade across borders, not the domestic use of the system. It would look different if we did node share within the borders. But as far as global import and export trade, ocean trade is where the greatest growth is, both in terms of value and in terms of total tonnage, if we measured it that way over the long term.
Just a couple comments just to elaborate maybe a little bit more. You know, the Port of Savannah, the container facility specifically, runs about a little over 2 million TEUs, or 20-foot equivalent units right now. And the facility will manage, they try to stay about 20%. I'm speaking for the Ports Authority, and Stacey would probably have you up here, but I'll do it for you for now. States try to stay about 20% above what their peak levels are. So the terminal, the way it sits, with some improvements in technology, improvements in layout, can handle about 6 million TEUs. So it can triple in size and be able to flow that cargo just as efficiently as they move it today. You know, things like the Panama Canal, and this is all outlined in the report as well in more detail than you'll want or need. But the Panama Canal deepening and expanding in 2014, the Savannah Harbor Deepening Project, that'll be complete by 2014 to be able to accept those bigger ships, but more importantly, fuller ships, bringing more cargo into our port. That gets it to the port. I think where it connects back into some of the panelists and policy and infrastructure is you get it through the gates, and the Ports Authority is doing all the right things to get it to the gate, but then it's out of their hands, right? Then it gets into that last mile connectivity, and we heard about the Jimmy DeLoach project and flowing into our inland port here in Atlanta and all over the country. I say it often that, that cargo doesn't come into Savannah because it wants to go to Savannah. It wants to go all over the country. And there's some slides in the report, again, that back that up and talk about how domestic this cargo is and how much it's flowing. So I think we're well poised. If we look at even further, discussions around the Jasper port, to be able to handle that cargo, that's frankly about 15 or 20 years away when that capacity will be needed. They've got that on tap as well. So I think there's a lot of great, very long-term things that are happening to be able to keep that cargo flowing in here through our ports. So, yes.
Hi, this is Martha Kliss from UCB Inc. A quick question for the Department of Transportation. It's clearly stated that there's a lot of future changes coming to relieve congestion and the traffic. Has that been considered to expand the current subway system beyond the metro area so people are able to utilize and obviously reduce the congestion as a result of it?
Yeah, Eric and I will kind of co-answer this question. As part of our plan was one of the key components is we've got to maintain the existing core transit services we have today. They're hanging on by their fingernails. We lost Clayton Transit Service, I guess, a few weeks ago in the Atlanta area. MARTA is contemplating slashing services by 20 to 40%, laying off 1,000 workers. So the finances are not in place to expand transit right now. But the long-term vision is to expand transit. That's the only way we can meet the need. And Eric is working hard. And you tell them a little bit about commuter rail and intercity passenger rail.
Sure. I think you see, while despite the revenue situation, there's been a tremendous amount of planning and consensus in the Atlanta region, particularly, for advancing transit. There's what's called Concept 3, which is the regional vision for transit, which calls for expansion of transit, of heavy rail transit, the MARTA system, inclusion of intercity passenger rail services outside of the core of Atlanta, as well as bus rapid transit, taking advantage of the managed lane system that Todd referred to. We're also working at the department with folks around the state to come up with a statewide vision for rail which would provide passenger rail service to all points of the state. But again, those are planning efforts that are well underway and will be realized once there is a funding scenario in place for that. And I think we've made that case in the state strategic plan about the need for additional investment that will help us do those additional types of capacity projects. Right now, again, our real core issue with transit, with rail, with highways is how do we maintain and optimize what we have. And until we get some additional revenues to help us with that, doing some of the additional capacity that we want to plan and have planned for, it's going to be very difficult to achieve.
Very true. In the back.
Yeah, thank you, Paige. Mike Roush with iTech for Business. What are the current hot items or initiatives or trends are companies using in terms of technology that's going to further drive supply chain management?
Mark?
I'll take that one. I think what we're hearing from our clients, a couple of conferences we've been to, I'll plug Georgia Tech. At Georgia Tech in the last month or so, if there's one wish that surfaces that they identify kind of as the holy grail is end-to-end visibility from procurement or manufacturing point overseas through all modes, deconsolidation, over the water, over the rail, intermodal, all the way to the recipient's warehouse or end destination. They don't have that true end-to-end visibility right now. And this truly is an inventory play. The push recently has been to drive inventories down. That's not news to anyone, but inventory is viewed right now by a lot of clients as kind of a bank account where you put your money in and it goes down in value every month and you have to pay them to keep it for you, and you can only get it out occasionally in little drips and drabs. When you don't have visibility, it drives uncertainty. Uncertainty drives risk, and the buffer to risk is inventory. So that's truly the one thing they're all clamoring for is that true visibility end-to-end of not only where it is, but what it is and when it'll be there, and that full vision. We're accustomed to it domestically. You ship a package with UPS from here to San Francisco, and you can see it every stop along the way. Real-time, pure visibility, you know what's happening. You don't get that type of visibility globally across modes, across different carrier types, and across different continents. And that truly is kind of the one thing they're all clamoring for is how do we get that? And the first one to get there is going to have something.
I'd just also add, validate, the visibility is definitely probably the number one challenge and desire from technology, driven by their customers, for the providers needing that visibility. In the report, we talk a lot about, how do you get started? If you're a small business, 81% of the trucking companies in Georgia are less than 5 employees. They have much different challenges on integrating technology into their process than a large firm would. We saw some of the access to capital things that Paul talked about that makes them a little more competitive right out of the gate. So being able, in the report, we outlined 10 different steps on, what are the different kinds of solutions for supply chain visibility, and then a 9-step process on how to get started. Real simple, not my ideas, from a conglomeration of a bunch of experts around the world. So it's some tools you can use and read. A lot of you already know how to do it. A lot of you are doing it already, but there's some tools out there that hopefully will be helpful for you. We look forward to exploring more.
Bob White with the Henry County Development Authority. And this, I'll start off with Todd. You can kick it down to the other DOT-related people. But we've talked about the growth of the ports, Savannah, Brunswick, talked about the Panama Canal expansions, the Jasper Port in South Carolina. A lot of elements are looking at north, south, east, west connectivity. A lot of those goods, though, still coming back in, going up through Atlanta to get to I-20 to I-85. And continuing up I-75, and we've obviously got some bottlenecks in that area. What does the state see, or the FHA or whoever, relative to strategies for improving the freight flow from Savannah into Atlanta via the interstate system?
There are several strategies. One strategy is not related to improvement of the road network, but it's getting more of that freight onto rail as opposed to roadways. Secondly, in Atlanta, we've got to make improvements to 75 between Macon and Atlanta. We know that. You said, I think you're from Henry County, so it goes right through your county. And what a mess all the time, it seems like, especially on weekends, right? So we know we need improvements there, and that's kind of a high priority on our list, trying to get some capacity in that corridor. Another item, and I think Chris back here didn't mention it, Chris Pettis from Thomaston area, there's a need to have some connectivity for the traffic coming right now through Atlanta that wants to get I-20 to the west toward Birmingham and ultimately 75 toward Chattanooga, keep them out of Atlanta. So how do you do that? Well, you maybe provide some connectivity from somewhere along 75 across through maybe Thomaston or north over toward 85 and ultimately toward 20. And we're talking big dollars here, though. And to do that kind of connectivity requires lots of money. Those types of investments probably would be some kind of tolled facility. So it would take years to get it done. But certainly now is the time to be thinking along those lines. You can make some short-term improvements by improving some of the corridors that are there now, and those corridors and not making them limited access. But we know that limited access facilities are the best way to get freight moved on trucks as opposed to surface streets. A lot of our GRIP network, and for those who don't know what GRIP stands for, is the Governor's Road Improvement Program. That is the four-laning of a lot of our rural highways. That has done a good job of getting freight moved across the state. And you do have options now, and as we finish out that system, you do have ability to get off the interstate as needed, but it's not the same as limited access facilities. And we know that you can just really make a lot more time and more efficiency on that. Particularly, I know this is not gas, but Macon area over toward Augusta. We know that's a good freight corridor. We're building the Fall Line Freeway, and it's going to be a nice facility, but it's going to have traffic lights, and it's got towns on the way, so it's not as efficient as building a limited access freeway. But we are building that connectivity and putting it in place.
And another plug for the report. The report has the GRIP network all laid out, and you can see all the different lines that are inside there as well. The question in the back? Craig, I'm sorry. It's a big, bright white light. Craig.
Okay, my name is Keith Woods. I'm here courtesy of the Transportation Club of Atlanta. The question is for Todd. Todd, you stated a desire in your presentation for projects to develop a criteria where they're return on investment driven. How do you find that playing in what could be sometimes a political environment where you have special interests at hand?
Well, you know, that's not going to be any different than any place in the country. You've got to weigh all that into the decision process, but essentially, when you're comparing, like particularly in a region, we want to make the decision based on what makes sense strategically, and that's the criteria that's going to be laid out. Obviously, there's going to be some legislative process involved in that. If you look at the Citizens Review Oversight Committee and the different aspects of the bill that just passed, there is a input from legislators. Legislators are there, though, not just to represent political interests. They're there to represent the people of the district as well, the district they represent. Mm-hmm. So it's not just because the legislator is for a project doesn't make it a political project. They're typically representing the public. Like, I'll give an example. In southwest Georgia, we've got a corridor between Albany and Valdosta on State Route 133. You know, the people who are pushing us hardest right now are legislators. Well, you may say that's political, but actually that is from a standpoint of the Marine Corps logistics base is sitting there in Albany. How do they go to Afghanistan right now? Well, they go straight down 133 to Valdosta and over to Jacksonville. So there is some validity behind that legislative process, and you know, the bill it takes that into consideration.
Question in the back.
Hello, my name is Robert with Supply Chain Optimizers. And to kind of dovetail off of the last question here, politically, with green being a big push right now, carbon emissions, things of that nature, there, a little bit closer. What kind of incentives are in this coming in from the federal government and from the state possibly that are going to really help incentivize with the initiatives that, to help companies go green? And Ken, from your perspective as a large company, what kind of things do you think would be beneficial from your side of it that the state could implement to really help companies with the sustainability of going green and carbon emissions and being a greener environment?
Ken, you want to take a stab at any comments on sustainability and green at JCB? Or no? Put you on the spot here. That's the beauty of these.
Yeah, obviously, our equipment is powered by diesel engines, so obviously that's all roads lead to that, don't they?
Sure.
And certainly, the technologies.
All roads are built by that too. So.
I'm sorry?
All roads are built by that, too.
Absolutely. Yeah, there's a lot of puns therein.
Yeah, there is.
Certainly, any legislation that can help mitigate and support the investment, the R&D cost in moving those technologies forward is the kind of help we'd be looking for. It's not outside the realm of possibility that diesel will at one point die. And so you start looking at alternative technologies, electric, power cell technologies, battery technologies. So that's what we're really talking about. There's a finite lifespan for diesel. And so, looking beyond diesel and the help in the research and development looking forward is what we're probably talking about, if that makes any sense.
It does.
Yep.
In the back, let's do a few more questions. We're right on schedule here.
Jerry Zlotucha with Versico Logistics. The national average for the price of diesel is over $3.08 a gallon, which is about 80 cents higher than it was a year ago, with basically stable supply and a weak demand. As we move into this recovery that we're predicting, how high can you feel, get your crystal ball out, that diesel will go? Will we see $4 a gallon probably by the end of the year?
Sure. Paul?
Actually, we've got, I'm not the energy group within our company, but they actually have forecasts that diesel and motor gasoline and all the petroleum product prices are going to continue to go up, but I don't think they've got it quite as sharp as $4 a gallon domestically by the end of the year. They've got a little longer-term trend. However, I should condition that and qualify it that that's somewhat also based on their assumptions looking at it in terms of supply fundamentals, not things that can be affected by political events in Iran or Venezuela or West Africa or all the other supply regions for petroleum that tend to affect short-term trader prices. And I could also refer back to my presentation of commodity prices. There's also some investors that have come back into some of the commodity markets looking for some returns because of this increase that we've seen in energy prices in the past 12 months. And so there is some upside risk in terms of those prices that are real. But we also don't see a return to quite the spikes that we saw in 2008 when you had a lot of speculators in the marketplace inflating some of those energy prices. Because as you mentioned, the fundamental demand isn't quite there to make it shoot up so high with the supply being what it is.
My answer was close. I should have said maybe. Emily in the back?
The last 3 or 4 questions, I'm going to piggyback on them. Building the infrastructure to support alternative fuels. Where is Georgia at? How are you working with the federal government? And how is the federal government working with all the other states so that we can get into LNG and CNG and get away from as much reliance on oil? Because when you look at every product, how many times does transportation touch it? From the point of getting the raw materials, the packaging, getting it through the distribution system to the final customer. It's quite a few. So fuel cost is a whole lot of logistics cost. So where are you guys at with that?
I think that's a whole other conference. Energy and use of fuel is a driving factor. You notice a trend here. In the report, we outline, the costs that transportation users see, and fuel is that top cost, fuel and also labor. They're doing a lot of things. On the biofuel side, we're doing a lot of things looking at cellulosic ethanol and others, pellets, not on the fuel side, but on fuel production. There's a lot of different things going on with regards to renewable energy here in Georgia. But again, that's another conference. But Todd?
I just want to say, I can't speak for the companies, but that is exactly why we were not pursuing an increase in the gas tax in Georgia. Because we think that's ultimately a dying breed of something to tax, because ultimately, as technology moves forward, we're going to use less and less diesel and gas, hopefully, right? So you've got to tax something else. So the sales tax, everybody uses products. If you buy a box of cereal, but you don't drive, that box of cereal got to your house somehow or another, use the transportation network, so everybody pays through a sales tax. So in Congress, they want to do a short-term fix and raise the gas tax, but knowing long-term, they've got to come to some different solution besides that.
Great. Well, I'm going to go ahead. We're 5 minutes over, unless there was somebody that was dying to ask a last-minute question, and nobody raised their hand. So that's quite a mindful. We've had a long couple hours, a lot of material covered. again, the report, when you look it over in the coming days, hopefully will remind you back of some of the things we talked about and you heard from our great panelists. First of all, let me give a round of applause for our panelists and for our speakers as well for today. So this section of the program is called Next Steps, and it'll just take a minute or two. While we were putting this event together, we had a lot of conversations with our collaborators that you can see in the back of the program, and a lot of enthusiasm in building it into something more. We've doubled it since last year. That's great. We'll see what next year brings. We've already had conversations just this week with the U.S. Department of Commerce and the U.S. Council of Competitiveness about using this model and using this enthusiasm to do something on more of a Southeast or a national scale. So there's a lot of opportunities that are being discussed. I want to do a couple things. I want to ask you to provide whatever feedback you have of things you liked about today, things that you hated about today. Hopefully the former is longer list than the latter. And any ideas you want to do next. We talked about a few things. We'll be sending you a couple emails, so you'll see yet another email from me to talk about feedback. Second, stay involved. We talked about industry partnership, and I think you get the message by now, but stay involved. If you're not involved in one of the industry associations that are collaborating with us, you're missing out. There's a lot of great benefit and a lot of great things for your companies to take part in some of these industry associations. They've got marketing material outside and membership information. I think most of them are here today with a group. Also, the exhibitors we had outside, again, an important part of that ecosystem is the service providers as well as the associations that are outside. So if you haven't stopped by and said hello and introduced yourself, please do that. You heard Todd Long describe a lot of the results from the survey. You heard the governor's request for you to stay involved in that survey. It is going to be open up. It's open now, and it will resend you the email to complete that survey if you haven't done it already. If you have, do it again. And we need your feedback. We need that. It will go directly into the development and shaping of this plan, of the plan that Cambridge Systematics is helping us develop. Third, all the presentations and videos, Georgia Public Broadcasting is recording all this. It'll be online. You'll be able to watch it again if you want to. And it'll be divided up into sections so you can look at individual parts. The presentations will all be online. The logistics report, you've got the web address in your agenda material, report.georgialogistics.org. We're going to post it over the weekend, so it'll be available for you for light reading next week. Also, a personal thank you to all my staff and the volunteers from the Department of Economic Development and all the other folks that help us put this on. We run a Center of Innovation for Logistics. We are not event planners. Never have been, never will be, although the governor says we're going to double this next year, which hopefully we will. We need more help. So we're going to solicit your help to make this grow and continue to be a successful event. But a personal thank you for making us look so good to my staff and all the volunteers that took time out of their day to come and help us today. So just want to thank them. And finally, a special thanks. I already thanked the industry associations, our industry collaborators, as we call them, that are bringing this industry together, or this ecosystem together. And then a special thanks to the Georgia Allies for helping us co-sponsor this event. Their networking, their outreach, and their support was a huge help. And thanks to Nancy Cobb of the One Georgia Authority for letting us do what we do. With that, a final thank you to all of you for taking the time away from your businesses and away from the economy in Georgia. Thank you. Hopefully this has been some value to you. This is the start. I said this last year. This is the beginning of a conversation. This is not the end of a crescendo. This is the beginning of a nice event, and we'll be talking a lot more in the coming weeks and months on what we can do next. So thank you. Stay involved, and we'll see you soon.